Okay, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us today for this Trinity College London Transformative Teachers webinar. It's just turned 4 o'clock in London, so it's time for us to get started. Just before we do, I see some of you have already been using the chat box. Please make sure you're using it throughout this webinar today. I know our speaker has got lots of questions for you, so it would be nice to get some good interaction in the chat box. Before I introduce today's speaker, just a few house rules that I know many of us are familiar with already. We're going to be here today for about 1 hour. There will be time at the end within this hour for questions, and I'm sure there'll be questions through this webinar as well. As you know, this is being recorded, so if you have to drop out at any moment, don't worry. This is being recorded and we will send you a link to the recording later on this week or early next week. Do play around with all the controls to change your view to make sure it's as comfortable as possible. And I see lots of you are pressing all kinds of buttons to show that you are interacting. Sometimes the chat box does move quite quickly, so please feel free to use the Q&A as well on one of the options there if you have a question for our speaker, which we can ask towards the end of today's hour. And by the end of this webinar, everyone who's joined us here today will automatically be sent a certificate of attendance or report that will come to you again within about 1 week or so. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speaker for today. So, Farid is a teacher educator with extensive English language teaching and training experience, including of the Trinity College London DIP TESOL. Based in Turkey, he's also a part-time YouTuber. I'm sure some of you will have seen his videos, where he shares his insights on effective teaching and learning. He specializes in exam preparation for teens and adults and is here today to share with us some ideas and practical strategies for creating fair and inclusive language assessment tailored to today's diverse classrooms. So, welcome, Farid. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Simon. Thank you, Alison, for the warm introduction. And hello, everybody. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I hope you're all doing fine. Let me start by sharing the screen so we can get started as soon as possible. Just let me know if you can see the screen right now in the chat box. Yeah, okay, that's perfect. Okay. All right. So, a huge thank you to the wonderful team at Trinity College of London for inviting me to speak today, especially Simon for the invitation. Thank you so much for joining us. It's truly a pleasure to be with you all today. Before we dive into today's session, well, Simon had a nice introduction, but I would like to add a few other things. A certified teacher trainer with an MA in language teaching and a bachelor's degree in English literature. And I've been in the world of ELT for about, roughly speaking, 20 years. I started when, in 2005. So, and yeah, if for those of you who enjoy learning through videos, as Simon said, I also run a YouTube channel called Teach with Farid. And on this channel, I share videos on various aspects of teaching and learning, including assessment strategies and effective teaching practices. Now, when I mentioned that I hold a Trinity DIP TESOL, I can't help but feel like that I'm back home. Because my experience during the DIP TESOL course was truly transformative. It changed my career and my approach to teaching in ways that I could never have imagined. So I'm thrilled once again to be here with you as a part of Trinity community. So feel free to get connected on social media, of course. And let's have a look at today's session objectives. Now, um, by the end of this webinar today, you'll be able to define what fair and inclusive assessment really means. I mean, beyond all the buzzwords. And you'll be able to understand why it matters so much in today's diverse classrooms. We'll be able to look at how bias can creep into our assessment, even unintentionally, and what we can do about it. You'd also walk away with a toolkit of practical strategies to reduce bias and improve accessibility. I'll be including strategies from universal design model for learning, and of course, an inclusive assessment resource pack, which I'll be introducing at the end of the session today. We'll also look at some digital tools and AI-powered platforms that can support inclusive practice without adding to your workload. So we'll also explore how feedback and dynamic assessment can be used not just to grade students, but to, in fact, genuinely support learning and growth. And throughout the session, we'll do a couple of activities that will show us how we can practically benefit from these ideas. And I do encourage you to take an active role and post your ideas using the chat box. I'm sure we can learn a lot from each other. So let's have a quick activity here. Thinking time. So what's one word that comes to your mind when you hear the word fair in an assessment? Fair, inclusive assessment. Please feel free to write your answers in the chat box. And I would love to read, and I also encourage you to read each other's answers. Perfect. Yes. Yes, unbiased objectivity is part of it, of course. Yeah. Equity. Yes, exactly. So what we're doing today, now that we have set the stage, let's dive into the first key topic, that what does fair and inclusive really mean in the context of assessment? So fairness in assessment, in fact, goes beyond simply giving every student the same test. It's about ensuring that each student has an equal opportunity to demonstrate their learning. Think of it like preparing a stage for a play. You wouldn't ask every actor to perform the same role or to deliver the same lines in the same way, right? So each person has their own strength, and fair assessment should basically recognize that. Some student might shine through written assessments, for example. Others might do better with oral presentations or visual tasks. And here we have inclusivity, which means making sure that no one is left behind because of factors outside their control, like language barriers, like cultural differences or learning challenges. I would say imagine you're hosting a dinner for friends with different dietary needs. So you wouldn't serve only one type of dish and expect everyone to enjoy it, right? You'd offer a variety, right? As one of the participants beautifully mentioned, you consider their preferences and their restrictions, of course. Similarly, in assessment, we need to provide different formats and supports to ensure all the students can access the assessment fairly. But why should assessment be fair and inclusive, basically? Well, it's not just about being nice, it's about improving learning outcomes. As assessment scholar Paul Black argued, formative assessments that are fair and inclusive allow students to demonstrate their abilities in a way that can accurately reflect their learning. So when assessments are designed with fairness in mind, they help students engage with the learning process rather than simply performing for a grade. All right. And research says, in fact, research emphasize that the assessment should not only measure knowledge, but also measure or make sure that the process is valid and just, unbiased, I mean, for all the learners. And let's talk about bias a little bit. Bias in assessment, as I said earlier, can creep in quite unintentionally, but it can have serious consequences. For example, in an English language exam, a reading comprehension passage about a specific cultural event might be familiar to some students, but not to others. And that can create unfair advantage. Similarly, in a biology exam, let's say, um, if the questions assume knowledge of a practical kind of plant, let's say, that some students are not exposed to, it could disadvantage others who lack that context, right? And I know came up with an example from a biology test or exam, because I know we have teachers from various disciplines joining us today, and this concept applies to all subjects, in fact. So whether it's English, biology, or any other field, it's crucial to be mindful um, of how cultural and contextual biases can affect our assessments and work towards creating more equitable practices for all students is indeed necessary. Now, I have let me bring these ideas to life with a real classroom example from my own teaching. So I once taught this mixed ability secondary class with 12 students. 8 of them were bilingual learners with, let's say, strong first language skills, but still developing confidence in English. So the assessment was persuasive writing at, let's say, around a B1 level, but I quickly realized that the usual English only marking criteria were making it basically hard for students to show what they really know. In other words, they were being judged more on grammar and vocabulary than on how well they could build a convincing argument, right? So to make the assessment fairer, I used an approach called socioculturally responsive assessment, um, which simply means I adapted the task to take into account the students' cultural backgrounds, their language strength, and their learning styles. So I created a bilingual planning template so students could organize their ideas in their first language first, if necessary. And then I added visuals and charts to help them plan their arguments. And I also allowed them to use their own language during brainstorming or during the early drafts. I also used a technique called dynamic assessment, which means I gave real-time feedback and support while they were writing, not just at the end of the session. So this helped them grow and improve as they worked. And of course, when it came to marking, I changed the usual criteria. So instead of focusing only on perfect grammar or vocabulary choice or spelling, I looked at how well um, students express their ideas. I looked at how well they can structure their writing and how well they can consider their audience. And this is part of what's called Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, which is all about planning from the start, to include all the learners. And well, fortunately, all the students completed the task. They were more engaged, they wrote better arguments, and at the end of the day, they felt more confident, right? So the experience, I can say, reminded me as a teacher of something very important, that fairness doesn't mean treating everyone exactly the same. It means giving each student what they actually need to succeed. So that was my experience as a classroom case study. Um, now that we have established the importance of fairness and inclusivity, let's move into the practical strategies for reducing bias and improving accessibility in our assessments. This is actually where we begin putting those principles into practice. Um, First, you can give your assessment a bias scan. That's what I call it, a bias scan. So before you use your assessment, you can ask yourself, are there references that might be unfamiliar to some students? Are the questions clear? Or is there unnecessary linguistic complexity that might trip up learners who understand the content but not the language? For example, I once designed a reading task about a cultural a festival, a local cultural festival. So it was great for some students, but um, um, not very understandable to a lot of others. So I had to revise it, and I had to provide extra context and vocabulary support. And I had to, of course, include more globally accessible themes like music or nature or even technology, right? And you can start applying universal design for learning principles, that is UDL principles. It's a game changer. Universal design for learning is all about designing assessment and instruction from the start, from the beginning, to meet the needs of all learners. It's not just adjusting after students struggle. Think of it like building a public space with ramps and elevators not as an afterthought for some, but as an inclusive starting point for everyone. So what can we do? In fact, UDL encourages teachers to offer students multiple ways of accessing information: visuals, text, audio, right? Multiple ways of expressing what they know. They can use writing, they can use speaking, they can use visual representations. And last but not least, multiple ways of engaging. So students can choose the topics or the formats based on interest, right? And in fact, when students are given agency, their performance improves, and so does their confidence, right? Um, we know that students come to us with different learning profiles. Mhm. Some need extra time, some benefit from visuals or scaffolded language. Others may have limited literacy in their first language even. So by planning proactively, we reduce the stress and we reduce the stress that comes with needing a special accommodations. So it's also a good idea to use culturally sensitive content, right? If we feel all assessments with, let's say, idioms or jokes or context specific content, we may quite unknowingly exclude learners. For example, imagine a science quiz asking about the Thanksgiving food chain, or an English listening task referencing UK soap operas. It could potentially make some students feel left out. And um, personally, I have learned to check not just for the difficulty level of the task, but also for assumptions I might be making. All right. Now, um, I have an activity if you are ready. Um, but let me just take a look at some of the comments here before we move to the activity. So if there is any questions or anything, I might be able to address. Or you can also ask your questions at the end of the session. So um, I'm also taking track of time. What if you are assessing writing? So this is only a skill they are able to use to demonstrate competency in essay writing, for example. Yes, the example I provided earlier was about writing, in fact. So sometimes we have students who might struggle in terms of language, right? So they need to brainstorm in their L1, and this actually helps them to be familiar with the context of the writing. So I would allow them to use their L1 at least for the first stage, at least for the brainstorming phase, so that they know what they need to write. Now, later on, I've got a slide and I can show you the difference between a more traditional style assessment and a more inclusive style assessment. That would be nice. But right now, let's do an activity together. I'm going to show you a few example questions that could be considered biased in assessments. And I would like you to take a look, trying to modify them. and trying to make them more inclusive and accessible. So take a few seconds. Let me go to the next slide here. Take a few seconds, please, to think about how you would change the content to make it more culturally neutral, let's say, and fair to all students. So look at example one, please. We have a speaking assessment at an English B1 level. So the question is, describe your favorite TV show and explain why you enjoy it. Well, years ago, I would say there is nothing wrong with that question. It's fine. But right now, I am aware of the fact that this question or this prompt, let's say, has certain assumptions in it, right? So I would like you to use the chat box, and maybe you can offer, you can rephrase this prompt to make it more accessible or to make it more inclusive. Please, let's. Uh-huh. And I'm following your answers in the chat box. Your favorite blog or internet? Uh-huh. Yes. A favorite story is a good idea. Thank you, Rachel. Your favorite show. So remember that the prompt should not include specific assumptions. Yeah, your favorite activity. Yeah, that is a good idea as well. Yes, thank you, Simon. Do young people still watch TV shows, right? Yes. That is the assumption, right? So do young people still really like watch TV shows, right? I don't really know. And what do we mean by TV, by the way? Is it like the regular TV thing, or are you talking about different streaming platforms? What is TV basically, right? So that might bring with itself some assumptions, and this we can, as some of you beautifully mentioned, we can have a modified version, something like describe an activity you enjoy in your free time and explain why you like it. So this is quite more general, right? And it avoids assuming access to technology, or it avoids assuming a specific entertainment formats like TV, and it makes it more universally relatable, right? Thank you. Let's look at example two, which is taken from a biology assessment. Now, the question is, observe and describe the plants growing in your garden. I would like to read it like this: in your garden or neighborhood, what conditions help them grow well? So, how can we modify this to make it more relatable? And again, there is a little bit of assumption in this question as well. So please use the chat box. Let's see. And I also encourage you to read. I don't have a garden, Simon says. That's right. Me neither. Assumption that everyone has a garden. That is the problem here, right? Right, exactly. So, Seria, thank you very much. Observe and describe the plants in your school garden. At least I believe, I guess most schools have a garden, some sort. Yes, yes, that's a very lovely version. Thank you. Choose a tree in your neighborhood, right? Tell about your favorite, or talk about your favorite park, right? These are all nice. Go outside and take a walk, get close to nature, right? So then you can have the assessment. Thank you, Nahid. Um, so we can have all these modified version that allow students to, let's say, select an animal or insect, which is familiar to them, regardless of their geographical or cultural background or assumptions that they might have. Thank you so much. Um, so right now, as as we can see, fairness doesn't mean we need to remove interesting or engaging content from our assessments. Rather, it's about giving students multiple entry points, right? So just a little tweaking here and there can make your assessment as inclusive as a good dinner party. Remember? So there is something for everybody, right, at your table. So, um, all right, now even more practical. Let's get even more practical. Let's dive into this practical toolkit. Um, you've got your principles clear. You've learned to spot bias. Now it's time to roll up your sleeves and talk tools, in fact, right? After all, even the best chef needs good utensil, right? To whip up a masterpiece. So first off, rubrics and checklists. A well-crafted rubric is just like a reliable GPS, right? It clearly guides the students and the teacher to the destination. Okay, so when students understand exactly what's expected of them, they feel more confident and empowered. And you get fairer, more consistent results. For instance, imagine giving your students a writing assignment, all right? Now, without clear criteria, I would say, as confusing as assembling flat pack furniture without instructions. You know what I mean? But with a detailed rubric, both teacher and the student know exactly what's expected. And that makes assessment transparent and fair. Next up, let's briefly touch on some AI-powered tools. Of course, later on, I'll be introducing some ways you can leverage generative AI, like, ChatGPT, to help you with more inclusive assessment. Anyway, these platforms can be incredibly helpful, especially for large classes or for frequent formative assessments, because they can quickly provide initial feedback on language accuracy and fluency. But remember, they're just tools. They're not for sure replacements for your professional judgment as a teacher. So it's like an autopilot in a plane. Okay, so it's helpful, but it cannot always replace the pilot. So and finally, don't underestimate the power of peer and self-assessment. Empowering students to reflect on their work and to the work of their classmates will create a classroom environment where students become more autonomous learners. So we have Padlet here. Just give me a second. We have Padlet here. I love using Padlet for peer assessment during speaking tasks. For instance, let me share my personal experience. Last month, I asked my B2 students to record short speeches about some environmental issues. So they posted their videos onto to this Padlet wall, and classmates gave a structured rubric-based feedback. I had already provided them with the rubric, and everyone's opinion counted equally, and the students learned from both giving and receiving constructive feedback. So the tool basically transformed my classroom into a supportive feedback loop. And I'm sure 100% that most of you are familiar with these technology tools because they have been around for years and years. But if we try to look at it from like a perspective of a more inclusive classroom and more inclusive assessment, they are really helpful. We have Quizlet. Um, um, it has saved me countless times when, preparing students for vocabulary heavy tests. So I usually create interactive flashcard sets and vocabulary games, of course, that are tailored to the students' language levels. And most students enjoy self-paced learning. And this accommodates learners who need repetition or additional support. It's just like a game show, the competitive element motivates the students, and it turns revision from just a simple task into an engaging and more personalized experience. And lastly, we have Google Forms. Easy. I don't know if you have used Google Forms before, but I often use it to quickly create quizzes or formative assessment. For instance, in a recent grammar quiz for a diverse exam preparation group, I added different question formats. I had audio clips, multiple choice questions, and short answers. So I was doing my best to ensure that the test was basically accessible to all learners, right? So these are the tools that I often use. And this was the slide I was talking to you about. Now that we have talked about rubrics, here's a side-by-side comparison of a traditional rubric and a more inclusive version that I adapted for a writing task. On the left, you see the typical structure, grammar and vocabulary dominating the criteria. So the task must be completed in writing, and all the students are judged by exactly the same criteria, regardless of background, regardless of their strength, and regardless of their preferences. On the right is what I call an inclusive makeover. So here, language accuracy is still valued, right? But it's just one part of the picture, right? Students are assessed on how well they can express and organize their ideas, whether through writing, a short video, or a visual presentation. They can brainstorm in their L1 if that helps them think more clearly. And rather than forcing every learner into one mold, we allow flexibility, and we celebrate different strengths, right? So in fact, this approach doesn't lower expectations. it raises the chances of success by removing unnecessary barriers. That's the whole point. And from my experience, students produce deeper, more meaningful work because they feel seen, they feel supported, and that's the whole point. Now, I'd say these days, it feels like any presentation would be lacking if we don't discuss the impact of AI. So that's why I've brought you some inclusive assessment strategies that we can use with generative AI tools like ChatGPT, Gemini, and any favorite AI model you have. So trying to be quick so that we can fit everything into time, and we give you some Q&A time as well. First of all, ChatGPT can help you identify and avoid unintended bias. So that's what I do. I often ask ChatGPT, any AI models, I usually use ChatGPT, that's why I'm mentioning. I often ask ChatGPT something like, here's a question I want to use. Can you spot any cultural or linguistic bias? And it quickly highlights potential issues I might have missed. It's like having a second pair of eyes, you know? And ChatGPT also helps me quickly create differentiated tasks. So for example, if I have to adapt a reading task for a variety of language abilities within the same classroom, I simply ask AI, create 3 differentiated questions based on this text for beginner, intermediate, and advanced students. And within seconds, boom, I have customized tasks suited perfectly for each group, right? And finally, you can use AI to create more culturally, let's say, neutral assessment content. Let's say you're worried about a reading passage. You're worried a reading passage or a writing prompt may not resonate with all your students, culturally speaking. So AI can suggest alternative texts or modify your existing texts to ensure that your assessment in culture is culturally neutral. All right. Now, we also have, we need to touch a little bit on the idea of dynamic assessment. So here, I'm going to show you how we can transform assessment from a simple measuring a stick into a more meaningful experience. And the whole approach is known as dynamic assessment, which is pretty much rooted in Vygotsky's concept of ZPD, zone of proximal development, which, as many of you know, is the sweet spot where learning occurs. It's like teaching someone to ride a bike. So what you usually do is you hold on just long enough for them to find their balance, right? And you gradually let them go, right? And similarly, when we combine assessment with instructional support, we help students grow confidently and more independently. So in practical terms, imagine you're assessing speaking skills with a shy intermediate student. Instead of marking their mistakes, dynamic assessment means you intervene gently. you offer prompts and you ask more guided questions to help the student perform better. So you're assessing their true potential, not just what they know at the moment. Feedback is also essential. As you know, effective feedback isn't just about correcting mistakes, it's about empowering learners. And instead of saying that this answer is wrong or this answer is right, we can make it more constructive. Now, to again put these ideas into more practical strategies, let's do a quick activity together one more time. How can we make these tasks fairer, more dynamic, and inclusive? Please take a look. The traditional task is write a 150-word essay about your last holiday. Again, what do you think is the potential problem here? We have some sort of assumption. Yes, exactly. Thank you. The assumption is all students have had a recent holiday experience, or maybe some students are not comfortable discussing their personal experiences, right? So instead, we can choose something like talk about a holiday or write about a holiday you have experienced, or a holiday you would like to experience in future, or an interesting place you would you have read or heard about, right? And this provides, again, multiple options, making it culturally more inclusive. Exactly. No holiday experience, or it's often hard to recall past experiences. Now, what about this one? The traditional listening task, right? Let's not just talk about writing. Let's talk about other skills. So it goes like, listen to this audio clip about British weather and answer the comprehension questions. Potential problem? There's some kind of bias, right? Yes, thank you, Omid. No British weather experience. Yes. And we need to come up with culturally specific context um, um, that, or a more inclusive context, basically, that uh, um, avoids putting students into disadvantaged position, right? Uh-huh. Now, as we're approaching the end of the webinar, I would like to introduce some resources for further reading. These are amazing books that any language teacher, I highly recommend any language teacher um, to read these books. And I also have I have a question, Simon. Would it be possible to share the slides with the with our dear audience today? All right, that's great. That's great. So, and I have an inclusive assessment resource pack, um, which is amazing. I mean, I've put together uh, what I already know about inclusive assessment, the tools and examples we talked about today, and of course, a few bonus. You'll find example rubrics, lesson templates, you'll find planning tools, students' self-reflection prompts. Also, there is a nice mini lesson plan that, you know, as an example of how to include inclusive assessment, and a ChatGPT prompt bank which you can use. And I would like to share the link into the chat box. Would it work if I do that? I guess that's the easiest way, right? Let's see. Okay, of course. I hope I can copy paste the link here. This is a link to a Google Drive where you can download the ideas and everything you see here. Make sure you head over, download this, and use it in your classes with your students. So these are the takeaways today. We talked about fair assessment. What does it mean? What are the practical tools and how we can accommodate to the needs of different students? And of course, I have included a reflection phase that you can use after this session. This slide is especially for those of you who have been teaching for a while, because as you know, even with years and years of experience, we all benefit from stepping back and simply asking, is my assessment practice still serving all my students, all my learners today? So I invite you to spend 10 to 15 minutes sometime after the webinar, revisiting one of your regular assessment tasks, and think about who it serves well and who might be left on the margin. And ask yourself, when was the last time you adopted an assessment to better reflect learner, to better reflect learner diversity? And how do assessments reflect your beliefs about culture, about language, and fairness? Thank you so much. Before leaving this session, I would like to share a favorite quote by Dylan William, a pioneer in formative assessment. This quote by Dylan William beautifully captures the heart of inclusive and formative assessment. It reminds us that assessment isn't just about collecting marks. It's about informing better decisions. So if an assessment doesn't help someone make a better decision, then it's just data. But when it does, it becomes a powerful driver of learning. Thank you so much again, everyone, for perfect. You were able to download. Thank you so much to Simon, Alison, the whole Trinity team. Thank you to the lovely audience who participated so well. You were amazing. And of course, if you like more practical strategies, assessment tips, and effective teaching ideas, you can always find me on my YouTube channel, Teach with Farid. Just go over and type it in the search box, and I'd love to connect with you there. So, and if you have any questions, please let me know.
Absolutely great. Thank you so much for that. I'll let you get a breath of air now after all of that wonderful information and all of those very thoughtful and things we need to reflect on there. I think I especially liked the quote, when students are given agency, their performance improves. That's really, really nice. And something else that stood out for me was the role that the L1 or trans languaging can play in terms of, during a listening, you could be taking notes in your L1, even though you're listening in English, or if you're brainstorming ideas before you have to speak or before you're writing an essay, that can also be done in an L1, and it's very valid and very welcome in the ideas that you're talking about, and annotations as well. And finally, I think the thing that stood out for me was this another great quote there. Make it like a good dinner party. There's something for everyone there. So this multimodality, really nice, and taking into account things like learner preferences or the mood of the learner that day. Really, really wonderful ideas here. A couple of questions that have come in. One of them is about this wonderful idea again about the bias scan there. So you said that we can do this ourselves, and you gave us some very nice ideas about using generative AI as well. Do you think that this is something that can be done communally? In other words, is it a good idea to talk about this kind of thing with other teachers in our schools that we're working with and try and figure out where the bias might be?
Uh, I'm myself a school teacher. So when you talk about the school context, you often have a huge workload, right, that the teachers have to deal with on daily basis. Um, Most of the ideas that I shared here are practical, and they can be used for or with busy teachers, right? So it would be a perfect idea to for the teachers to come together to share their ideas to see what actually works in their context, and if they need to have some modifications based on their context, because simply what we discussed today, as I said, can be applied across all different subjects, not just English. Basically, any school teacher might be able to use them. Yeah, it is a fantastic idea for teachers to come together to, from time to time to talk about the assessment and strategies and to see what works for them in their context.
Excellent, good, yeah, and sort of nice mix. And I know that some of, well, many teachers and some of the teachers that join us, they don't really work in fields or areas where they have a community so much. So it's really nice to have the ideas like the AI stuff that you're talking about and some of the prompts that you were mentioning. And I'm sure people will be contacting you for your wonderful prompts of how to exactly tweak the text that we're using. But also another question that came in here was this idea that I think some people weren't thinking of, that say you're teaching or you're testing reading, you're assessing reading, this idea that we can tweak not the reading text necessarily, that can stay the same as long as there's no bias, but we can think about the questions themselves and really grade those ones. So that the question that came in is that right? We don't have to always change the text, but by changing the questions, we're supporting our learners.
To me, the bottom line is understanding what your learner actually needs. Because, well, according to research, we talked about Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. So all I need to know as a teacher is to understand where my learner is so that I can give them the right amount of challenge, the challenge that they actually need. If it's too easy, they get bored, right? If it's too challenging, they won't be able to do it. So as a teacher, once I start to understand the right amount of challenge that is needed to help my students grow and become more independent, I can do everything with the task. I can change questions, right? I can have multiple questions. I can have essay-like questions for different students. The point is, as I said, we need to provide the right amount of challenge so we can best help each learner.
Excellent, yeah. And I think there's some nice comments coming in the chat box as well. Of course, Trinity College London, as well as doing teacher training with the CERT TESOL, DIP TESOL, etc. Trinity College London also has its own English language assessments, like the GESI or the ISE as well. So yes, to answer the questions that are coming in from a Trinity perspective, these are always being looked at in different ways they can be developed and so on. So I think there'll be some colleagues from Trinity definitely listening to this and thinking about how this can be integrated into these kind of assessments as well. But of course, as you said earlier, assessment comes not just at sort of summative at the end, it's also formative as we're going through a class or through a semester or indeed through the year as well. I think we're just about out of time on this one. So we've hit most questions, but you've got your all of your contact details are there. I'm sure people will be asking lots of questions, and I know you're very open to that, which is wonderful. So it just leaves me to say thank you very much, everyone, for joining today. Do look out for the details of our next Transformative Teachers webinar next month. And a huge thank you, Farid, for all of your wonderful ideas and sharing all these things and really making us reflect on our practices today. So thank you very, very, very much.
Thank you for the invitation, and thank you everyone for the great participation. Hope to see you soon again.